Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Why We Huddle. This is College Huddle's small little show where we take a look at different schools, the traditions, what makes them great, and of course, the experience of being a college football fan. In our last episode, we went to the Pacific Northwest and spoke about the Washington Huskies. We are going completely back across the country, and today we speak to the Florida International Golden Panthers. And welcome to the show, Jake. How are you doing today?
Hi, Daniel. Thanks for having me on. I'm happy to finally get the College Huddle going and officially launched. And we at the Paws Up Podcast are super excited to see what this project has in store for us. And already a pretty cool collaboration here with you, and should be a fun episode.
Should be a fun episode. I do want to tell everyone before we begin, Jake is a prime example of the benefits of the college huddle. He's given me lots of tips and tricks as far as improving my graphics game and stuff like that. So I want to give him that shout out before we get in, and he talks to us about his fandom and what makes FIU great.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's fun to send advice to all these podcasts. I mean, there are so many in the College Huddle already, and there's only going to be more coming, so just making sure that everybody is dialed in, can produce the best content they can, especially because, as I'm sure you know, college football season is only right around the corner. I mean, eventually we're going to get back to the nitty-gritty of preparing for week 1 or even in some cases week 0, and hopefully taking advantage of all these cool collaborations with other podcast members. I know myself and the Paws Up Podcast will definitely collab with the Hoosier Huddle when FIU takes on Indiana to start off the season.
For sure. And I can't wait to speak to some people from around. I wish we had a week 1 podcast, but currently we do not. Of course, for Florida, that is Miami. But I think we are up to 7 schools. Yesterday we added Wyoming and New Mexico.
Yeah. We've definitely crossed the 70-member threshold, way more than half of all FBS teams in general. And it's just super sick. I remember when the College Huddle first began, and there were only so many. And when we got the invite, we were super happy. We were confused at first because the Ohio podcast, which set this up, DM'd us and was like, "Hey, we'd love to collab with you on a project we're working on." And we were like, "Okay, that's cool. We'd be down, except FIU doesn't really play Ohio State in like any sport ever, so I don't understand what this project could be." But then he clarified it's the College Huddle, and we were definitely hooked because we're trying to grow the show. It's come a long way since November of 2022 when we first began. Myself and my friend and co-host Kevin Brawl, who's probably watching this, we were covering FIU athletics, not with the Paws Up podcast in mind. This was well before that. I was covering football, and he was getting ready to cover the baseball season for FIU because baseball is his sport. I'm more of a football guy. Say, Lovey. We were approached by some of the higher-ups of Lemon City Live. It's a South Florida sports media outlet. In addition to FIU, I also cover the Dolphins, the Florida Panthers, and even the NASCAR races at Homestead Miami Speedway. He approached us and talked to us about an idea that at the time, if you wanted FIU content in the form of a podcast, you had absolutely nothing. So he suggested, and we worked on this and worked out all the kinks and all the whatnot, that if we could get a podcast going for FIU, it would be one of its kind. It would instantly become the premier way for people to figure out and listen to people who genuinely care about FIU athletics. So we were on board immediately. Back then, the show was I still remember how weird our first episode is in hindsight. The graphics were not great. We were kind of thrown into the middle of the latter end of the football season, not to mention basketball, soccer, sort of having to go through all those sports in one hour episode with just Kevin and I. It was nuts. But we got through that, and we've eventually, to spare some time, we've grown to the point where we're now well over 50 episodes in. We've collaborated with FIU Athletics enough to the point where we've now earned the moniker of calling ourselves the official fan podcast of FIU Athletics. And it's definitely something that we've wanted to be known as for a while. And it's very rewarding to see it that way. And of course, we'll be there on Saturday to provide coverage for the FIU football spring showcase at 5 p.m. That should definitely be pretty fun.
Perfect. And that would be the Saturday that this is being recorded, which is the second week of April. So let's go and get into it. Let's start off talking about FIU. For those that may not know much about FIU, could you tell me a little bit about FIU, the colors, the mascot, and tell us a little bit about your stadium?
FIU, Florida International University. I'm 99.9% certain that's the only FBS or even FCS college team that has the word international in their name, but for good reason. FIU is located right in the heart of Miami in this little section right on 8th Street called University Park. When people think of Miami and college, they of course think of the University of Miami. That's over in Coral Gables specifically, and it's a private school, very small enrollment, but obviously a very historic athletics program. Of course, you have the Hurricanes and football and so many other sports. FIU, on the other hand, is a massive university with multiple campuses spread all over Miami-Dade and even Broward County. The main one, like I mentioned, is in 8th Street. There's another one in Biscayne Bay, which I've attended a few times because I was a student at FIU, a recent graduate a couple years ago. FIU is, in my humble opinion, and you ask any FIU student or diehard fan this, and they'll agree, more indicative of what Miami and its culture is all about because of the extremely high enrollment, mainly of either locals of the Miami-Dade region. Of course, FIU has a massive Hispanic community and other minorities because of that, which is why it's so rooted in 305 culture, as we like to call it, compared to the limited sample you can get from the University of Miami. Athletics-wise, it definitely has a newer athletics program than that of the University of Miami. Back in the day, when they first began playing sports like basketball and baseball, they used to be called the Sunblazers. And it's a throwback. It's essentially turned into a throwback look that FIU still loves to go back to every now and then. And we love it. And we love it so much that we've designed our logo and colors to sort of revolve around that. Like, what would a modern day look of the FIU Sunblazers be? We went in and created our logos to sort of match that, because it's such a unique name to call your athletic program the Sunblazers. But eventually they changed it to the Golden Panthers, and in the 2000s they dropped Golden, and now it's just the Panthers. I think just like how UCF were the Golden Knights, and now they're just the Knights. So anyway, that is definitely a short description of what FIU is. It's massive. It's rooted in Miami, in the absolutely massive culture that a city as big and as famous as Miami is. FIU is the perfect representation of that. I would say more than the University of Miami, or as any FIU student or fan would give you the nickname for, the University of Coral Gables. That better represents them.
There you go. So tell me about the football stadium for FIU. Unlike, I believe you have your own stadium, unlike that University of Coral Gables that you reference. How they rent out one and still don't fill
it. They don't fill it up. I mean, granted, it's tough when you try to fill out a 50 to 60,000 stadium for a college program that has seen better days. I digress. We have the FIU football is the FIU football stadium. It used to be called the Ricardo Silva Stadium for the longest time. Now it's just known as the FIU football stadium. But you ask any student or fan, and they'll say it's called the Cage. That's its nickname. It's the Cage. It's a 20,000 seat stadium with a full wraparound concourse, and I think probably the best part about the stadium in its entirety is, like you mentioned, it's actually on campus. It's only a short walk away to the dorms. When I was a freshman at FIU, this was back in 2018, I used to live in this dorm area, this residential area called Panther Hall. The distance from Panther Hall to the FIU football stadium was maybe a 2-minute walk. It was just so awesome to be able to go and watch actual FBS football and not have to drive, not have to go anywhere. And even nowadays, I've long graduated, but I still, of course, go to the games, cover the games. It's easy to get to, it's easy to leave from, and it's even part of the sort of pavilion in FIU's campus, the MMC campus, as they call it, where it's also a short walk away to the baseball field, the Ocean Bank Convocation Center, and all the other athletic facilities there on campus for FIU. It's, if I were to give like a opinionated piece about the state of the stadium, it's good. It has metal bleachers, which, I mean, depending on who you ask, may not be your favorite way of sitting down to watch a football game, but it's serviceable. It gets the job done, and I've definitely grown to love it, considering how long I've been going to games, not just as a student, but also when I worked for Panther Now, which is the student newspaper at FIU, and covered the games then. That way, it's how I really got my first experience with FIU media. And then after I graduated and we formed the Paws Up Podcast, that we still go to them. And we will be back in September. It's going to be super fun.
Nice. And definitely always start of college football season is a great time. So at a typical home game for FIU, what are some of the particular traditions that make up FIU football culture?
A more recent tradition that FIU has sort of implemented actually happens outside the stadium. Right across from the stadium, another brand new residential building was built called Tamiami Hall, and it has a giant walkway from the entrance of the residential building to the football stadium itself. One cool tradition that they do is called Panther Walk, where about an hour and a half before the game starts, the players, the coaches, the mascot, his name is Rory. You've probably already seen him in the thumbnail for this video. The cheerleaders, everybody will walk directly from one side of the walkway to the stadium. All the students and fans line up, give them support. The band's rocking. There's even before that, there are tents with free food and free giveaways that students can go and check out. And it's just a fun pregame atmosphere. Lots of Hispanic music. If you don't like Latin music, R&B, all of that, you're not going to fit in. But thankfully, it's awesome, and the student body loves it. Obviously, the fraternities also get involved, put up tents of their own, some alcohol being given around, but it's a fun time. They want to make it like a party before the game, and then the students get into the game. Usually, there's a fun giveaway to the students that enter, and then after that, it's just strictly business inside the cage, as FIU looks to improve upon their last few seasons, which unfortunately have not gone that great. They're in the midst of having a relatively new head coach, Mike McIntyre. This alongside a relatively new athletic director in Scott Carr, who I've been able to work with quite frequently, and he approved the moniker of the official podcast of FIU Athletics. So we're always going to be happy about that. But no, it's a fun time before the game. They've really wanted to turn it into a party, like a Miami nightlife kind of ordeal, and then you get to watch some FBS football.
Now, during the game, are there any particular traditions, whether pregame or end of the third quarter? What do you have going on there?
They do fun mini games on the field every now and then. My personal favorite is the burger run, where the contestants have to I think there are 4 contestants total, 2 of which are the bottom buns, and the other 2 are the top buns. The top buns have to run back and forth, grabbing ingredients for the burger, like the patties, the tomatoes, the onions, the bacon, the lettuce, and then they have to plop on top of the other person to create the burger. And whoever does it first, obviously, wins that event. Aside from that, we have a DJ going on pretty much the whole game with some of the latest hits in South Florida. Not to mention the Biscayne Bay Lounge rocking in the certain section of the stadium, out giving out free cafecitos as well, Cuban coffee. You gotta love it. Football is not exactly the premier sport for Latin America or just Hispanic people here and there. Conveniently, FIU has a really great soccer program, and their baseball program is also in great shape. However, man, if there's one thing they prioritize, it is making everybody feel as welcome as they can, no matter where they're from, no matter how much they enjoy the sport of football or not. They want to make it an experience for you. And the best way to do that, aside from having all these parties and traditions, is to produce a winning program, of course. And FIU, they're trying to get back to that. A pair of 4-8 seasons is okay. It's an improvement over what has been the last few years for this football team. So hopefully we can finally get back into a bowl game for the first time since 2019, this FIU team, hopefully.
That's always a hope. I mean, Florida's not been bowlless that long, but I feel you in that there were better days, and we're hoping to get back there for sure. So let's go ahead and talk a little about your particular FIU story. When did you become a fan of FIU?
A few years after I was set to graduate high school. I was applying to a bunch of universities in Florida. I didn't want to leave the state. I wanted to prioritize staying in Florida. I love this state, as I'm sure you do. And obviously, South Florida, it's awesome. FIU was the best choice. They provided a solid amount of financial aid. They're only like a 30-minute drive from where I live. So it made the most sense. Not a couple of months before I graduated high school, FIU actually knocked off Toledo in the Bahamas Bowl, which was super fun to watch. It really got me invested into the team. It was like, oh my God, hopefully I got this is a football team I can watch for years and years and years. And then when I found out that, okay, I got a residential area on campus and it was only a short walk away from the stadium, that pretty much sealed the deal. This is awesome. You know, I won't lie. My mother and my father are fans of the Miami Hurricanes. So I grew up as a little kid watching Hurricanes football on Saturdays and then the Miami Dolphins on Sundays. Of course, that was tradition, as I'm sure it is in a lot of households in South Florida. But actually getting to go to FIU football games in person really made you appreciate the fact that, does FIU football have the notoriety that the Miami Hurricanes do? I'd say no. Barely any football teams across the country can match the notoriety and history that the Hurricanes can. But they can still provide some quality content for you to watch and for you to get invested in. And thankfully, as I've sort of become not a sportscaster, like a sports writer, a sports editor, and now a podcaster for the Paws Up Podcast, I've really gotten to know the coaches and the players we've had on the podcast in the past. We've had Scott Carr, the AD, on our show a bunch of times. And we've even gotten to the point where we had the president of the university, Dr. Kenneth Jessel, on the show, which was really cool for us to have the actual president of the university on.
No doubt.
I would say the best memory, and the reason I bring up the Hurricanes a lot, it's all going to come back to this. My best memory of FIU football, and I feel like if you ask any student who was a student around the time I was, from 2018 to class of 22, they'll say that a game in November between the FIU Panthers and the Miami Hurricanes, who prior to this game, FIU had never beaten them before. There was a massive brawl in the Orange Bowl in like 2006 between both these teams. So they pretty much elected not to play each other for a full decade before continuing before playing each other again. FIU did the impossible, the unthinkable towards the latter end of their season, a non-conference matchup in a neutral site game. It was supposed to be at FIU Stadium. They instead moved it to Marlins Park, now known as Lone Depot Park, the home of the Marlins, the baseball team, just to fill up as much seats as possible, which was a bit ironic because Marlins Park was the location of the old stadium for the Hurricanes, the Orange Bowl, which they, of course, tore down and built the new baseball stadium in. So a lot of pieces played into that game, but as it would turn out, FIU, they beat Miami, and I couldn't imagine. I went into that game thinking, okay, it's going to be a fun game. It's going to be fun to be at Marlins Park, watch FIU take on Miami. I didn't feel great about their chances. I thought they could do it. I didn't feel great. Of course, my mom and dad thought it was going to be a blowout, as did many of my peers, but that night, even after the game, going back to campus, celebrating with everyone all around the campus, the Graham Center, the Green Library, they were all jamming, knowing that we basically beat I wouldn't say our biggest rival. I think our biggest rival in football is FAU, which we play more often because they were in our conference for the longest before they made the jump to the American. But still, it's the case of little brother beating big brother, in a sport like this. And that's what made it super special. And I still remember, I still have the ticket saved. It's somewhere over there. I still have the ticket from that game. Just a fun little piece of memorabilia from it. But I'd say that was been the highlight of being an FIU fan so far.
And you know what? I've got to say, leads into you're talking about little brother taking down big brother. For those of us who are fans and have grown up fans of bigger schools, and of course, now you're a fan and do lots of sports coverage for FIU, how is it being a fan of, I guess, and I don't mean this derogatorily, but of a smaller school, or at least a smaller football program?
Well, on one hand, it's provided us excellent coverage because we're not competing with a whole lot of other media platforms. Obviously, you have the Miami Herald, you have WSVN, and you have those outlets. You have SI, who attend the games and cover the FIU Panthers. However, in the instance of a university such as, well, let's say the Florida Gators, there's plenty of podcasts and social media accounts to go around that provide active coverage of the Gators. And when you do that, and we've been told those stories from other podcasts, it's even some in the College Huddle, you're really competing to get the quotes you want, get guests on your show to help build it. That has not been the case for us, because if you want content that's not from the Paws Up podcast for FIU Athletics on like Twitter and or X, whatever you want to call it, Instagram or the Facebook groups, it's going to come from either Panther Now or like the FIU Barstool account. And those sites and those accounts are fine. But something we've really prided ourselves on is, for one thing, keeping an active podcast with weekly episodes since we've started in 2022. We've had a lot of guests ranging from either, like I had mentioned, the president of the university was insane. We've had the AD multiple times. We've had the head coach of the football team, Mike McIntyre. We've had the new, hopefully star quarterback of the Panthers, Keywan Jenkins, on. That was a fun episode. We've had a couple of other football players. And then Kevin has done a really great job connecting the Paws Up podcast to baseball, because, man, we've had so many baseball players on the show. It's actually ridiculous. Aside from that, we've had people like Billy Gill from the Dan Lebitard show, who was an FIU alum. We've had other alumni from all aspects of FIU. We've essentially, whenever we ask the SIDs for getting someone on the show, the answer is usually yes, because we've built up a great relationship with the SIDs and with the athletics program. And there's no one else really asking for that. And that has definitely proven a positive. Now, FIU's football program, by the way, is very new. They began in 2002. They don't have the extensive history that many other schools in FBS, not to mention in the state of Florida, of course, do. but they're definitely proving to make themselves a bigger and bigger and bigger program thanks to more publicity. In the last few years, they've really taken to heart the idea of expanding the brand, not just in Miami-Dade County, but also Monroe County, the Florida Keys, of course, Broward County, West Palm Beach, just all of those areas of the state of Florida, whether it's, you know, basic billboards or advertisements here and there, the Paws Up tour in which they go to different parts of South and even Central Florida, and doing all that stuff to make the fans happy and to make the alumni. FIU has an absolutely massive alumni group, then with most of them still residing in South and Central Florida. The biggest challenge that FIU athletics have had, and Scott Carr has talked to us about this, is bringing back both alumni back to the university to support the football teams and, you know, pack the cage, as they love to say, in addition to the active students that live on campus. Because let's be honest with ourselves, there are so many things to do on a Saturday in Miami. A Saturday night in Miami. There's so many things you could do. So FIU football is competing with that. Granted, they have the luxury of having a football stadium that's on campus. But at this point, the only way that FIU can expand their brand even further, they've done so many great projects that they've completed outside of the realm of on-the-field action. What's left for them to do is, like I had mentioned earlier, build a winning football program. And it's something that we all want to see happen because it's a South Florida football school. Of course, you're going to want to capitalize off of the amazing talent that comes out of South Florida football, whether it's in high school or transfers from the rest of Florida, even the rest of the country, which I think FIU has done a good job with. So all this to say, it is a smaller program. However, it's still on the up and up, and it has, because of that, produced some great advantages for us, which has only helped ourselves grown as much as we have in the span of like less than 2 years.
Awesome. And what's your personal, as you would say, what is Jake's experience being a fan of that smaller school on a fan level?
Well, I would say that I'd like to read the newspaper or listen to the local news as they hype up an FIU football game. That doesn't really happen as much as I would like. So that falls to us. We record and release the Paws Up preview for the FIU football seasons. They're a lot of fun to record. And obviously now, when we're in the College Huddle, we have we can now, you know, DM and hopefully get a lot of collaborations with those episodes. Like I mentioned, Hoosier Huddle when FIU takes on Indiana. Of course, you also have the Blue Raider Network, Topper Talk. You have Owl Chat, the Owl Chat podcast for Kennesaw State, which just joined Conference USA. It's going to be their first year in the FBS level, and I'm happy that FIU will be taking them on. So that's how we're going to get that's how we get our content. That's how we get hyped up. As a fan, I drive to the university. I park relatively close to the stadium. If I get there early, I'll walk over to oh geez, how am I blanking on the name right now? It'll come to me in a minute. But it's this awesome little shop relatively around the dorms. They sell these amazing cookies. You wouldn't believe, they're so good. Breezeway, there we go. Breezeway, this little shop called Breezeway, not that far away from the football stadium. If I won't get them before the game, I'll certainly get them after because they stay open late. Maybe I'll walk around the Graham Center a little bit, which is like the hub of FIU's campus. Check out the bookstore / the Barnes & Noble. Check out some of the latest merch, including what I'm wearing now, their special Vice unis, which they unveiled to some pretty solid appeal last year. I know it got a lot of attention on social media, having a Vice uniform, just one of many cool college uniforms that were released last year all over the country. And then I'll partake in some of the giveaways and some of the events before the game. And then as soon as my credentials ready to be picked up, I'll head inside and do a lap around the stadium, walk around the field as the players start to practice. I know a lot of them well, where I can just, dap them up, say, hey, what's good? And, best of luck for the game today. I know Kevin and I take photos that we'll eventually try to end up using for the articles we produce. We have our own website called the Paws Up page, where we drop written previews and written recaps for games. And the third wheel to our podcast is Jonathan Mayer, who is a SID for FIU Sports, and of course a good friend of both myself and Kevin. He'll hang out with us. We'll eat some Jersey Mikes in the press box as the game gets set to go. And after that, it does become sort of a working environment covering the games in the press box. But man, when FIU makes a cool play, when Kewan Jenkins threw the deep ball to Chris Mitchell for a touchdown in their game against Maine in week 2. Oh, that's always exciting to see. How can you really hold that in? But it's a pleasure to be able to speak and have normal conversations with the players before the game, and obviously have deep interviews with them after the game in the not the locker room, but the little conference center, I guess they have near their locker rooms, if you want. The field house. They call it the field house. But anyway, I digress. It's a fun experience game by game. And of course, we're only 2 years old, like we mentioned, the podcast. We want to keep growing and keep figuring out how we can make our coverage of these games even better. Something I've really been working on as of late is adding more cool graphics, not just for the actual episodes of the show, but even for our social media accounts, which have really blown up as of late. And it's awesome to see that. So it's a fun experience, not just as a fan before the game, but as a media during the game and after.
Awesome. And I can say in the College Huddle, not everyone has that media access. So that sounds like a very cool thing that being a follower of a small school benefits you guys for sure. Now, all right, let's go ahead. I want to talk about some of your personal favorite things with FIU. Do you have a favorite player that, whether it's someone you've interviewed for your podcast or just since you've been attending games, do you have a favorite FIU player football-wise?
Football-wise, in case he's somehow watching this, a player, an alma mater of FIU that I'd love to get on the show one day is someone that I got to watch in the NFL, because he's arguably the best player to come out of FIU football, being the former Colts and Cowboys wide receiver T.Y. Hilton. I really want him on the show. I loved watching him playing for Indianapolis. He was a dog, bro. He was a beast. But as far as active players go, like I said, we got Kewan Jenkins on the show. He's a cool dude. But we've really built a really great friendship with Chase Gabriel, who is the kicker for FIU football. And if I'm not mistaken, he was the first ever FIU football player that we had on our show. And he's just cool. He's chill. He's laid back, and he is a good kicker. Another player is Jackson McDonald, a tight end for us for the FIU last season. We had him on an episode of the podcast, and what made that episode super special was it was our first ever episode in person. Instead of being like a remote episode like this, we actually got to record it from the press box at the FIU football stadium,
very cool.
Midweek, which was super sick. And of course, he's a cool dude. He's from like the Florida Keys. He was a dog. But I'd say Chase Gabriel, man. He's granted, kickers matter. Kickers absolutely matter in the game of football. And he's a cool kicker, bro. He's super sick. Hopefully we'll have him back on the show as we get set to go, maybe in the months leading up to the football season. Yeah. But
I gotta say, I love the kickers matter. One of the Florida beat writers always says punters are people too. Now I know punters a little bit different, but we still got our specialists. So just one of those small little idea connections, across the game for sure. So that's a few of your favorite players. I think you said earlier, but I've got to ask for sure. Is that victory over Miami your favorite FIU football game?
Yes, because for many reasons. It's funny. I was a fan of the University of Miami before I was an FIU student. When I became an FIU student, I was basically told by the Barstool account and from the frats to abandon that. You know, they're our enemy. They're the distance from FIU's campus to the University of Miami's campus with moderate traffic is like 15 to 20 minutes. You can literally just hop on US 1 and drive directly to it from FIU to Coral Gables and the other way around. So what made that win so satisfying was that everything was against us. The year before, FIU had played Miami over at Hard Rock Stadium, where the Canes play their football games, and FIU got smashed. So that wasn't great leading into this game. And then we found out before the season began that they wouldn't even be playing that game at the FIU football stadium. They moved the game to a sort of neutral site location over at, of course, being Marlins Park. You know, it had like the FIU logo and all the FIU stuff on the field and whatnot. So I guess that was their reasoning. However, again, I would say it was like 60 to 70% Canes fans there because that was the stomping grounds of the Miami Hurricanes for the longest time. There's still a massive Canes fan base in that area. So there was so much going into this game that would have made people believe that, wow, they're just going to get crushed again. Granted, the Canes were not having a great season that year, and FIU was they were trying to go bowling, which they ended up doing. They lost to Arkansas State in the Camellia Bowl that year. But I just had a strange confidence on the drive there that this was going to happen, that FIU was probably going to get their biggest win in program history. And I still think it is to this day. I remember telling my parents before that game that, they were like, hope you have a great time. Things might not go your way, but it's still nice that you're going to Marlins Park supporting the team. And I'm like, wait. We're going to win this game. We're winning. We are absolutely going to walk out of that ballpark beating the Hurricanes for the first time ever in football. And they were like, oh, okay, all right, sure. And then it actually happened. It was just a masterpiece by FIU's defense. I think they had like 2 or 3 interceptions in that game. Everything worked out right. I believe the final score was, and I'll have to double check, 30-24 in favor of the Panthers. And it really put FIU on the map. They had like their 15 minutes of fame following that game because it's always nice to see a story of a smaller school beating the bigger team. And especially in this case, because like we mentioned, most of the players on FIU and Miami, that this spans years, maybe even decades, they probably know most of it. They probably know each other. They probably went to the same high schools. They went through the same adversities just to get to where they are. And so for that to finally happen in football, FIU has, like I mentioned, they have a great men's soccer program. They have a great swimming and diving program. They kick Miami's ass in those sports quite often. Football is a different story. So it was just so rewarding celebrating in the 300 level with some of my friends. We were like yelling like scoreboard, yeah. That we were just so unbelievably hyped. And like we mentioned, the party didn't stop there. We met up with the buses for the players and coaches arriving back on campus. It was like pretty much a party thrown there all around the MMC. There were just everyone was just so happy. They even had a couple days after that. They even had a miniature press conference at the Graham Center in this little pit area where they do press conferences there, where the players and the coaches were there, and they were just thanking everybody for their support that whole week leading up to the game, and they were just thanking them for just being there when they were at their highest, which I still think was that game. Is it the biggest win in FIU history? Admittedly, probably not. I mean, they've won a couple of bowl games. They won the Little Caesars Bowl back in the day, and they won the Bahamas Bowl, both ironically against Toledo. But it's going to be the game, unless something happens this year where they unexpectedly win the conference championship. They'll probably have to beat Liberty or Western Kentucky to do it. But unless something like that happens, I would say it still is and might be the best win in FIU history that I've ever seen.
And one last favorite for you. Do you have a particular play that just sticks out as your favorite play, whether it's from that Miami game or whether it's, from somewhere else? And why would it be your favorite if you do have a favorite play?
A particular play. Oof. I don't think FIU has a, band is on the field kind of play in their very young program history. But if I had to pick one specific play that I can always keep remembering in my head, as far as recent memory goes, it was a deep ball touchdown from Keywan Jenkins to Chris Mitchell in, I believe, week 3 when FIU beat North Texas at home. That was another massive win for FIU last season, probably their most impressive win last season overall. Granted, they went 4-8. It's kind of tough because aside from that, I mean, they have made some great plays in football games here and there that have gotten them the wins, but nothing really stands out to mind specifically. It's just a bunch of great highlights from some of the best players that FIU has had. Defensively, Donovan Manuel last year for FIU. He was a senior. He broke the single season forced fumbles record for FIU. And the play in which he broke that record, the whole stadium was blowing up because they knew it. It was such a fun time to see that happen. And now Donovan Manuel has a good chance of being drafted by an NFL team. So it's come full circle for him. It's pretty much an amalgamation of great plays by great players, but not one single play stands out in the same way that other teams might have. Like I said, the band is on the field kind of play. We don't have that. We're not that old.
Right. I didn't know if you guys had, and again, I'll admit there's some stuff I know about FIU. There's a lot I don't. So I didn't know if you had like a walk-off Hail Mary moment, or if, hey, we had a big game against FAU and it was close in the fourth quarter and our running back breaks through the line, 70-yard touchdown. So I figured, why not ask? Well, I've got you here to see if you had any particular favorite play. And speaking of FAU, Florida Atlantic, is that really a big rivalry, or is that just a local or a semi-local team that you happen to play every year?
It's a rivalry that's big enough to the point where it has a name. It's called the Shula Bowl, in memory of the late Don Shula, who was the head coach for the Miami Dolphins for the longest time. I believe it's named that because when both teams first met each other, I believe back in 2002 or 2003, both of their head coaches had connections to Don Shula. You had Don Strock for FIU, who was a former quarterback that played under Shula, and then you had Howard Schnellenberger for FAU, who was an assistant. So and I think a big reason for this is because whenever FIU moved to a new conference, for example, from the Sun Belt to Conference USA, FAU did the same thing. Both programs were pretty much growing up at the exact same time. I believe FIU's and FAU's programs are almost identical as far as age goes. So they're only like a year apart. So they've both been brand new schools. And of course, like you'd mentioned, it's a local thing. From the distance from us to Boca Raton, where they play, is like an hour, which isn't too bad. It has a name. It even has a fun trophy with like the helmets of both schools like connected to each other. That rivalry has taken a hit, however, because FAU was one of many teams that bailed on Conference USA a couple of years ago to go to the American Athletic Conference. A few other teams went to the Sun Belt. So FAU didn't make the move. They're still in Conference USA. They're one of only a few teams that still remain from Conference USA that have been there for years now. I think you also have Louisiana Tech, Middle Tennessee, Western Kentucky, and UTEP. So last year was the first time in a while that FIU did not play FAU in football. Thankfully, they've come to their senses and are actually making it a non-conference game earlier in the season now. So, yeah, they are going to be continuing the rivalry in football, which is awesome. And I've never been to their stadium in Boca Raton, by the way. However, I will definitely make the drive up there this season to do that. They have a podcast as well. It's not in the College Huddle, but it's still a really great podcast. They do the Owl's Nest. I'll definitely want to collab with them as that game approaches. But yeah, I mean, it's not just football. Whenever they play each other in both basketball and baseball, attendance is usually good, usually better than normal for both teams. Obviously, FIU had that really great Final Four run a couple of years ago in basketball, which obviously was interesting to see from an outside perspective at FIU. And no, it's just great to see that both teams are going to be playing each other again in football. It's a good rivalry between two very similar programs as far as history and age go. So I hope it never goes away again.
For sure. I mean, they say it a lot, but with rivalries, records don't matter. And with two programs that are hoping to build, you're talking about, things FIU has done to kind of build its brand and, bring in more fans or all that. Having big games like that, even if you go 4-8, if you've got an FAU, especially, times when they've had like a Lane Kiffin or whatnot, that's something like, okay, we really want to go and beat that guy. That's something that's going to bring fans in, that's going to bring out the pride in, the students. And so hopefully that does not go away. I'm always sad when, teams leave conferences and then can't figure out ways to play. So it's good to know that's coming back. I talked about it actually with Washington, who's still playing Wazoo, when I spoke to a hooligan, and I mentioned like Kansas, Missouri, Texas A&M, things like that were very unfortunate. Heck, UCF, USF, I don't think played last year, and it's things like that that it's just sad to get rid of that. I mean, I know I put up an article for the SEC and the College Huddle on the website, so check out collegehuddle.com if you have not.
Of course.
Where there are some optimistic things where you do lose some of that, but in time you find great things. So definitely check out that article. But back to the point, it is still sad, especially when you have local rivalries like in FAU, FIU, or a UCF, USF, or a border war like Kansas, Missouri.
Yeah.
Because those are things that fans can get excited about. Even if you have the worst year, you're still excited about your rivalry game. So definitely good to hear. I'll be honest, I didn't realize that last year was a year off between you guys and FAU, and that's why we do this. You're here to inform, fans like myself about your school. Some people know a lot about it, some people don't. And then sometimes here I am slipping up like, oh my gosh, I missed one thing. I was too busy wallowing in my 5th and 7th season.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It still blows my mind that Conference USA ultimately survived conference realignment, and the Pac-12 is on life alert, which is obviously disappointing. However, Conference USA has done, I think, a pretty solid job in getting newcomers. If there's something that they've done extraordinarily well compared to other G5 conferences, it's bringing in FCS talent to FBS and seeing what clicks. When all those teams left, I'm talking, UTSA, Charlotte, Southern Miss, Marshall, Rice, Old Dominion, FAU, of course, I keep going. They've supplemented them with obviously a great addition in Liberty. They were an independent program. They made the Fiesta Bowl, I believe, last year as the conference champions. So that's obviously been a great addition. Then you have teams like New Mexico State and Jacksonville State who went bowling in their first years. Jacksonville State was in a similar situation as James Madison was, where technically they couldn't go bowling because it was their first year in FBS, but they let them do it as it would turn out. Then you have Sam Houston State as well, a very young program. This season, like I mentioned, they're bringing in Kennesaw State out in Georgia, so hopefully that could be a fun. I believe they are the closest team in Conference USA to FIU now, because of course FIU is no longer there, or FAU is no longer there. And then in 2025, they're going to bring another FCS team in Delaware. So hopefully we can get that state filled in the map of the College Huddle soon with the Blue Hens.
For sure. So as we go ahead and begin to wrap this up, I've got to ask one more time. Can you tell everyone where they can find you?
So it says it right here. My personal Twitter handle is at Jake the MC. That's also my Twitter my Instagram handle as well. The Paws Up Podcast, their handle for every single social media platform is at Paws Up Podcast. We have a bunch of platforms that we produce content for. All of our episodes for our podcast, as well as our previews and whatnot, they go live on our X account. They also go live on our Facebook account, and they go live on our YouTube account, also at Paws Up Podcast. And not that long ago, we just agreed to a partnership with Believe, however you want to say it. It's a network for podcasts all around the country, not just for collegiate, also professional. So you can also find audio versions of all of our work on there as well, including our own Spotify and Apple Podcast accounts. And of course, as we get closer to the football season, you can find some articles that we've done, and of course, some of the work we've done with others, including this episode of Why We Huddle, on the College Huddle account. So at Paws Up Podcast on all the social media platforms is where you can find our work.
Awesome. I'll definitely be sure to check that out. And for sure, be keeping track of you guys in the fall. And this has been a pleasure learning more about FIU and just everything that goes into it. I know myself, being from Florida and not knowing as much as I even thought maybe I did, was great to learn. I'm sure for our College Huddle listeners that are all over the place, Ohio, Tennessee, even out in Washington, maybe they learned, hey, this is a cool school. Maybe I want to go check it out across country, or now I know more in case we bring them in to have a cupcake game. And I don't say that derogatorily, because heck, Miami thought they had a cupcake game, and your favorite game ever is when you showed them it sure as heck was not. So it's definitely been good hearing from someone from a G5 school again. As someone who's grown up with an SEC school, I've always wondered what it's like, and you've definitely helped me understand that quite a bit more. Do you have anything else to say to our listeners before we head out for the episode?
Well, Daniel, I'd like to acknowledge the fact that the Florida Gators did take on FIU back in November 21st of 2009 over at the Swamp.
I remember that.
We ended in a 62-3 win for the Gators. So with that said, you know, if FIU is ever back in Gainesville, maybe in a future home and home series, maybe in 2042, I'd love to make the trip up there. But thanks for having me on. And like I said, the Paws Up Podcast has grown quite a bit in a very short amount of time, to the point where, like I said, we're now the official fan podcast of FIU athletics. So if you're an active listener, or if you're maybe just a casual fan who wants to see what FIU goes on, just know that our content is only going to continue to get better. We have a lot of episodes with great guests lined up already for the weeks to come. And once we get back to football season, man, we're going to be dialed in, producing some absolutely amazing content for you all to check out, obviously collabing with College Huddle reps, and it should be a fun one. And, well, what do we say? We say Paws Up as we close out episodes.
Paws Up. And before we go, I think I should say, I've not said it to you before, I actually used to get my dog, and if she were around, I'd probably pull her up to do it. But that used to be my thing with her, to get her to stand on her hind legs to beg for treats. I'd be like, paws up, and she would stand up. In fact, she's probably hearing me say this now. And so with that, we'll say paws up. Good luck to you guys this season, and I cannot wait to see what you guys have in store. You've made me want to check out the Paws Up Podcast, knowing that you are actually the official podcast, and you bring in everyone from, hey, here's a kicker on the football team, all the way up to here's the university president. I don't know how many fan podcasts could say that they do that. That is awesome. Right. With that said, everyone, thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed this episode, and we will see you next time on Why We Huddle.